channel. We're going to do a driver test today with Tailor-Made drivers. I've got M2 2017, which was my driver that I used in tournaments and did really well with. And we're going to take a look and compare the 2017 line to the Sim and Sim Max into the Qi10 and see the differences. So starting off with the M2. $111, 153, 249 carry. I've noticed that these balls tend to produce, about 10 miles an hour to upwards of 14 depending on your swing speed, slower ball speed. So these are limited range and a design for short driving ranges. So that's why I say we'll get a comparison. That's really what I'm after, is just to see the differences. Alright, now let's test the Sim Max. Oh, this is a fantastic driver. This is, in my opinion, a little bit better than the M2. The sound is better. Yeah, sounds better. Look is better. I played this one instead of the Sim because my spin numbers were on the low side because I started working on a stronger grip. Yeah, I'm getting locked in with this thing. It's just, I was gonna have a little bit of a fade to it. But it's all on the same line. Like, these are all fairway finders. All right, here's a table of the club and ball data for the M2 in red and the Sim Max in green. We got the Sim in a 9-degree head. That's a beautiful shot. 114 club, 161 ball. Like, look how much faster ball speed's coming on. Already it jumped. Like, $111, 155, yeah. That's probably gonna be a little baby fade. I kind of held on to that a little bit more. Baby fade, good shot. 57 ball speed. So this driver is a little faster than the other two. Even leaving the face open, it's still, you know, I hit those swing speeds of 113 with the other ones. This one just giving a little bit extra in ball speed, which this is the club that I've got my personal best with before. Got into that one a little bit more. Didn't get much out of it. 12, left it a little open. You know, little fades, little draws. Let me see if I can draw one. Yeah, that's perfect. 159 ball. That'll just show you it's just a little faster. Here's a table of the data so far. Feel free to pause the video if you want to take a deeper look at the numbers. Okay, here's the Qi10. I got this set at 9 degrees. Base. That's a great drive. 113, 157. There you go. Okay, we got a 161. There's another good drive. 114. It's a little off the toe, so the speed's down, but one thing I've noticed about this driver compared to the sim is that it tends to retain the spin better than the sim did. There's just a good core swing. 113, probably a little fade. 158 ball. Yeah, it's right in there with the sim numbers. I wouldn't say it's any faster, and it doesn't feel like it has the same aerodynamic drag to it, even though I'm not actually swinging it any faster. Here's the data of all the drivers. Feel free to pause the video and take a look at the numbers before moving on. That is all I got in the tank. That is it for a test for today. That is all I've got for the test. My initial thoughts are that the M2 and the Sim Max were pretty close. I thought that the sound and feel was a little better on the Sim Max. That doesn't mean off the center of the face it's any faster, but there are some intangibles in driver design that actually are noticeable improvements from year to year. The one thing that I wanted to test with the Tailormades is Tailormade seem to jump around a lot, meaning what driver is good for you one year may not be good in the same line the next year. So for example, I fit into the 2017 M2 very, very well. I could hit the M1, but I liked the M2 just a little bit better. I thought it was fairly close in spin rates because I needed the weight back for the forgiveness. So I didn't really see any noticeable gains with the M1, and in fact, it just felt like it was a little more aerodynamically sluggish. Probably due to the track, I'm not really sure, but I didn't seem to move it as fast. Fast forward into the Sim line, I still stayed in the Sim Max because the Sim was the lowest spin driver. So the Sim Max seemed to fit really, really well. However, the following year, which is the driver I didn't test, I fit into the Sim 2 better than the Sim 2 Max because it spun a little more than the Sim. So if you needed a low spin driver and you had the Sim and you went out and tested the Sim 2, it wasn't going to perform as good for you. For someone like myself, that the Sim at the time was a little too low spin, Sim 2 was actually a better driver. And when you couple that with the cup face technology, I got pretty good ball speeds and very good forgiveness off of it. It was a driver that I used in tournaments. It did better for me than the Sim 2 Max because that was a little more draw biased. That's the driver that I've gotten my personal best of ball speed with at 185 a few years ago when I was doing speed training. Obviously you can see I'm nowhere near that today, especially with these range balls, but I have reached 176 a couple weeks ago with the Qi10. So This test was specifically just to address the differences in driver design, and the reason I use TaylorMade is because they don't do small incremental changes and stick to the same line. They're chasing primarily distance, and so they tend to move the needle more in different directions, and so you've got to be careful when you're purchasing clubs from a company like TaylorMade, because what works for you in, say, the low spin line one year may not be good for you the next year. It might be better for you the following year, so you may have to skip cycles or go back and forth between different model lines. Let's go back to the office, check out the data, and see which club performed the best. Welcome back. We're now indoors where it's much cooler, so let's take a look at the numbers and see what the differences are between the heads. So we look at the M2 and let's compare it to the Sim Max. The M2 was built in 2017, the Sim Max was in 2020, so that's a 3-year difference between the drivers. So let's see what the differences are between those two drivers. Ball speeds are fairly similar. The Sim Max is a little faster, which is interesting because I actually had some swings that had higher club head speeds with the 2017 M2. So the M2 had less output for the input than the Sim Max did. But if you look at the distance, the M2 was a faster, if you look at the distance, the M2 was a longer driver than the Sim Max was. About 4 yards in carry and about 7 yards in total. And the reason for that is if you look at the spin rates, the Sim Max spun about 400 RPMs more. This is why I wanted to use the limited flight range balls, because they're going to spin a lot more, which is going to accentuate the differences between the heads. So that's really what we're looking at, is the driver heads. I want to answer the question of, are drivers maxed out? And if there are any gains, what potentially are there and who are they for? So those are the questions we're going to try to answer. So in this particular case, looking at the Sim Max is actually a shorter driver. But why? Because of the spin? Is it actually a higher spin head? Maybe a little bit, but I think the answer lies more in where the strikes for the mishits happen to be. When I missed it, I had the face a little open and I had a toe strike. Well, what TaylorMade did, starting with the M3 line, is they created what they call twist face. So they're opening the toe section up a little more, creating a little more loft, and they're also pointing it a little bit more out to the right. So what I tended to get with the Sim Max was a ball that kind of just was pushed out to the right and stayed there. Whereas the M2 tended to gear back just a little bit more, and you'll see that in the dispersion chart. I'll bring that up. So looking at the dispersion chart, the M2 was a little bit more accurate driver. And it also was one of the lowest spinning drivers on average. I don't think it's the lowest spin, but it was on average the lowest spinning. And I think it's because it just managed the spin a lot better because of its combination of forgiveness and face design and where I happened to strike the ball on that face. All right, let's look at the Sim driver from 2020. Immediately you'll notice that the ball speed jumps compared to the M2 and the Sim Max. It jumped 3 miles an hour, and I noticed that on the first swing, and it wasn't from club head speed. The M2, I got 157 ball speed on one shot, and it took almost 15 miles an hour club head speed to do it. With the very first shot, I got 157 off of the Sim, and it did it with about an 111 club head speed. It gave more output with less input. It was a faster driver. I noticed that across the board. I got no balls above 157 with the M2. I got no ball speeds above 157 with the M2, and I think my fastest with the Sim Max was 155. But I really didn't try to step on the Sim Max either. I just kind of got into a groove, and that driver actually hit the fewest shots for the data test, just because I got into a groove and was hitting some decent shots with it. So going back to the Sim, it was a little higher launch than the M2. 2 yards longer, which is not much on both the carry and the total, but it did spin 100 RPMs more. And again, I think that goes back to strike location being in the toe, face slightly open, tended to balloon those spins up just a little bit more. If you look at consistency, the M2 is a more consistent driver. Its dispersion was tighter across the board. Every single standard deviation measurement was significantly tighter on the M2 than the Sim. So if I had to go out and play a tournament tomorrow and I had to pick between the Sim Max, Sim, and the M2, I would pick the M2 driver. It just did better, and it's not giving up that much between the three drivers. However, let's bring in the Qi10 LS. Now, one thing that's different with the Qi10 LS is I didn't have the weight set to neutral like I did with the sim. I moved the weight into my playing position, which is halfway to fade. And people are gonna say, well, that skews the data. And I'm like, exactly, that's exactly what I was trying to do, was skew the data. I wanted to show that there are ball flight changes that can be made with a driver head. I tested it initially in the standard setting for the Qi10 LS, and the numbers were so close, nearly identical to the sim. I'm like, well, that's not what I'm trying to show here. I'm trying to answer the question of, are there gains to be had? And the answer in this case is maybe. It definitely produced a different dispersion pattern. You can see by this dispersion pattern between the sim and the Qi10 LS, the Qi10 LS missed more to the right, Qi10 LS drives were further right than the sims were. The sim tended to have more left shots than the Qi10. Now, I guarantee if I move the sliding weight into the fade setting for the sim, it would produce the same results. I'm not trying to show how I can set up the different driver heads to be as similar as possible. What I'm trying to show is are there gains? Are driver heads maxed out, and can there be any benefits to changing driver heads? And so in this particular case, with the weight track being set more towards the fade setting, you'll notice that the Qi10 had tighter deltas or standard deviations across every metric over the sim, as well as a few compared to the M2. So looking at the ball speed went up 0.2 miles an hour. So is the sim slower than the Qi10 LS? Absolutely not. In fact, the sim had the fastest max ball speed by 0.3 miles an hour compared to the Qi10 LS, but the Qi10 LS had more top ball speeds than the sim did. So I think that overall the consistency of the Qi10 LS is higher than the sim, but it isn't necessarily a faster driver, which is why I decided to switch and just put the weight back into the playable position, because this makes it a very important point in the fact that, are there gains to be had from switching drivers? Because not all drivers, you go get the Qi35 doesn't have movable weights. So if you bought that driver off the rack, you're not going to be able to adjust it maybe, or at least fine tune it as well as I can with the Qi10 LS, which is why I bought the Qi10 LS, because I can now move the weight. I do believe that the Qi10 LS is a more consistent driver than the sim, just because it has a little bit higher moment of inertia, but it's not a significant amount. But you can see here, by moving that weight into the fade setting, it definitely made the driver a lot more consistent. You can see here the one thing that it actually did well was it managed my backspin. My backspin was more consistent with the Qi10 LS than it was with the M2. And the ball speed was faster. So here's the thing. When you're looking at a driver, is the M2 a slower driver off the center of the face than the Qi10 LS? No, it's not. They're both going to be about the same speed. Why is the Qi10 LS 3 miles an hour faster? The real question is, why is it 3 miles an hour faster with the sim and the Qi10 LS over the M2 and the sim max? Where did that ball speed gain come from? Because if your argument is that drivers are the same speed out of the center of the face, why do we have two drivers that are 3 miles an hour faster than two other drivers? It's going to be based in the design, and we'll talk about that. I'll show you this photo from Tailormade. When you have a driver with a higher CG, to get the gear effect, to get the high launch, low spin, you have to hit above the center of gravity. The higher you hit on the face, you're going to start losing ball speed. As you start lowering the center of gravity on the face, you will start having a bigger sweet spot for max ball speed. High on the face, so like for example, drivers back in pre-2000, like for example, Tiger's driver, he used to play the Titleist 975 in a 7.5 degree driver loft. And the reason for that is because the center of gravity was so high on those drivers that if you hit it that high on the face, you would end up losing like 2 to 3 miles an hour ball speed. So you typically wanted to hit it right on the center of gravity spot, or even sometimes you would hit it slightly below, and what that would do is give a lot of spin. So to combat that spin, you would just simply lower the driver loft down to like again, 7.5 degrees. Well, with the more modern drivers, you got guys like Dustin Johnson with the same swing speed, and again, different delivery patterns, but they're playing drivers now in the 10.5 degree range. And it's because the driver's center of gravities have dropped closer to the center of the face. So now you can hit it just fractionally above the center of the face and get more ball speed, but you're still getting those same spin properties. So looking at TaylorMade, and this kind of goes back to the point of, are all drivers built the same? The answer is absolutely not. If you look at TaylorMade from 2016 M1 line to the 2017 M1 M2 line and the M3 line as well, you can see that what TaylorMade is doing. TaylorMade with the SLDR dropped the center of gravity as low as they could, and it ended up being as fairly far forward. And you can see that with the M1 430, that's the lowest, most forward CG of any driver that's probably ever been produced. It's got an MOI of just under 3,500, and it's got a CG that's below the center of the face. Well, when they went to the 2017, they tried to create more stability, and so you can see the M1 is now it's got the center of gravity higher than the center of the face, and it's got more MOI to try to build in some forgiveness. And then when to the M3, they built the center of gravity even higher. It's trying to build in more forgiveness. And then you can see the M2 sits at just under 4,800 MOI. And it's about 4 millimeters above the center of the face. That's where its sweet spot is for the center of gravity. So you can see, based off these center of gravity projections, where the gear effect is going to take place. And if you look at one of the most extreme examples, you have a driver, which one is that? The M4, which is 6.5 millimeters above the center of the face, and that's about 7 millimeters higher than the 2016 M1 430. That's a big difference, almost 7 millimeters of difference to get the same shot. So you would have to hit that M4 significantly higher on the face just to kind of keep the spin down. So these are going to benefit different players. So know which type of player you are and what your misses are, and this will help you pick the correct driver. So for example, this is why I went to the Qi10 LS, because my miss pattern is from the center of the face out towards the toe. By shifting the center of gravity out and putting the mass right behind my strike spot, I now have less gearing of the club head. Whereas if I didn't have that ability to shift the center of gravity, so I would have to get a driver with a higher center of gravity head to try to keep the spin up enough to manage those miss hits. So I hope that makes sense, and you can kind of see that in the data. I'll show you this with the TaylorMade sim. You can see where the sweet spot is between the sim and the sim max. The sim is a little more toe side and it's below the center of the face, whereas the sim max is above the center of the face and actually a little more heel side. So the gearing effect is going to depend on how far you hit it from that center of gravity spot. So that's where you get a driver that's going to be a little more fade biased or a little more draw biased. And that's the essence of why maybe even having that movable weight track is so important, because it allows you to maneuver and manage that strike. So if you struck the ball like heel side, you'd have to actually probably move that weight track from centered, and you could start moving in the heel to line it back up with the center of the face. So, all right, so to summarize and wrap up this video, when you're looking at purchasing a driver, you have to be aware as a purchaser. You need to arm yourself with knowledge. You as a consumer are responsible for taking charge of your own game, because nobody is going to care more about your game than you do. So understanding yourself and understanding what you need to gain out of your equipment is essential. So going back to what my points were, if you tend to strike the ball in a certain spot, sometimes getting a driver that's suited to that particular spot with the center of gravity location can help you, whether it be fade biased or draw biased, getting the weight shifted, because each driver has some type of inherent bias built into it. If you happen to be a higher spin player,
then maybe you need to get a lower spin driver. All that means is that they're shifting the center of gravity down lower, so that way you get more gear effect off the vertical portion of the face. If you typically are a higher spin player, they just move the CG up a little higher. So getting the CG located vertically and horizontally across the face is going to help you as a player. What that typically means is a forward CG is typically going to get a decreased spin. It's going to decrease your closure rate. So if you were somebody that has a very heavy release and is afraid of hooking the ball, a forward CG can help with that. And MOI also is going to be decreased if you move the CG forward. So there are going to be some trade-offs, so understanding what those are. Next part is the CG, the vertical CG, CG up or down. A vertical CG higher, that's going to typically decrease your dynamic loft, and it's going to increase your spin rates. If you have the CG back, it's going to increase your dynamic loft, and it's going to increase your spin. And it's also going to increase your closure rate, but it's going to give you also a higher moment of inertia. So there are trade-offs. When it comes to the driver's center of gravity, it can be moved up, down, left, right, and forward and back within the head. And my point to this whole entire video is that no driver is designed the same. You've got to find what driver works best for you and what driver types, and try to stay in those. And understand that the companies, especially companies like TaylorMade, are moving the needle in large amounts sometimes every single year. So for example, what we saw with the early TaylorMade drivers from the SLDR, they were pushing distance. After they pushed distance and went too far with that, they started moving the center of gravities up a little bit higher and increasing the MOI. So you can see that they were trying to push forgiveness more every year as they tried to retain the speed, but they sacrificed some of the speed in order to make the driver a little bit more playable. So that's what you have to understand as far as driver design. So there are different types of, so within the driver design, let's talk about how the different CG locations impact the driver performance. So if you have a forward CG, meaning it's closer to the face, you're typically going to have a decreased dynamic loft, your spin is going to be decreased, and you're going to have a decreased closure rate of the head, meaning it's going to go from open to square to closed at a slower rate, which means you are going to have to do more of the work as the golfer to get that face closed. That can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on the player. Your MOI is also going to be decreased. So there are some trade-offs there, but for me as a golfer, I typically do better as far as being able to square up the face with a forward CG, which is why I really like the Qi10 LS, because I feel like I can actually hit fades easier because I can the rate of rotation on the face slows down. I had a very difficult time with the Ping G430 Max 10K. I felt like sometimes that the face would close down on its own and there was nothing I could do to hold it off. So that could be attributed to maybe that extreme rearward weight that driver had. So that's why be careful, because just because the driver has the packaging of 10,000 MOI as being the most forgiving, on paper it can be the most forgiving, but I hit the same amount of fairways with the Qi10 LS as I did with the Ping G430 Max, and the MOI is about probably about 1/3 of the Ping driver. So forgiveness is a relative term. So for me, what was more important was retaining the backspin to retain the ball stability, and then that forward CG actually helps me keep the face open a little bit more, and having the weight shifted now towards the toe also helps me manage my strike a little better, especially when I strike it ever so slightly more towards the toe. Moving forward, if we have the CG in the higher position on the face, that's going to decrease our dynamic loft, and it's going to increase our spin rates with the gear effect. If we have the CG down, that's going to increase our dynamic loft, because remember, the CG is now lower below where the strike point is, and so it's going to create more of that rocking effect of the driver and create more vertical gear effect. So that's going to increase our dynamic loft, but it's also going to decrease our spin rates because of the vertical gearing. If we have the CG back in the driver head, meaning furthest away from the face, that's going to increase our dynamic loft, because that weight is now pushing forward with the driver head, causing more shaft deflection. And it's going to increase our spin rates. It's going to increase the driver face closure rate. And it's going to increase our MOI. So this is why also sometimes going from the same shaft and changing out heads, meaning if you went from a very far forward CG head to one that's very far back, may not work with the same shaft. The bottom line is buyer beware. I went out to a golf store. I went to 3 different. So bottom line is buyer beware. I went to 3 different golf stores just testing drivers because they didn't have what I wanted in stock on a new Tailor-Made release several years ago. And I got the salesmen that come up, they approach you, ask you a few questions, and then they try to fit you for a driver. And what the interesting part with that is, and this may be a subject for a whole different video, but I had 3 different head recommendations and different shaft recommendations and settings for each of the drivers. None of them were the same or consistent. So that really is an alarming thing to me, because so if I were spending, at the time $350, $400, $500, $600, $700 now for a custom fit driver, and I'm going to plan on playing that through the cycle of the driver, how good was that fitting? And and I can't completely blame the salesman either. They're taking a really quick glimpse at your golf swing, and then they're trying to make a recommendation based off what they see. At the same time, none of those salesmen knew what they were talking about that I went to that particular day. There are good ones out there, but there's a lot of bad ones or very ignorant ones when it comes to club fitting that don't know what they're talking about. So that's why I say buyer beware. Take charge of your own game, because nobody's going to care about your golf game more than you do, whether it's purchasing golf clubs or taking golf lessons. So you have to ask yourself, how do you want to set up your bag? And this is what I did. It may not be for everybody. So I could play the 2017 M2 just fine, and it misses both left and right with really no bias. And I can kind of work the ball in both directions. I love that driver. It's a great driver. There's nothing wrong with it. One of the reasons I went to the Qi10 LS was the ball speed gain, the distance gains, but also with that movable weight, I was able to put it partially into the fade setting to help with the gear effect stabilization on those toe misses. And so with that driver, I have it set up to be a straight to fade biased driver, like heavily fade biased. And so that way I've taken left out of play as reasonably well as possible with that driver. And so for me, when I'm pulling out that club and I'm looking at a fairway, I'm looking at straight down the left side with a slight fade. If it's something where I have to hit a 20-yard draw, that's not the club I'm probably going to pull out. So what I do then is my next club down is a Tailor-Made mini driver, 13.5-degree loft. And that club is very draw biased. So if I need to hit a draw, I go down to the mini driver. Also, because it's 13.5 degrees, it spins more and has more spin retention, which protects the draw. So I have a driver that is fade biased, I have a mini driver that is straight to draw biased, and then if I really need to put something in play, I've got a 5-wood and 4-iron and so on down the bag. So I hope that's good advice. I hope it helps you. I've tried different things. Even Phil, when he was playing the Masters, he had 2 different drivers. So, getting your scores lowered starts with getting the ball in play off the tee. Well, I think that's enough information for this video. I don't want to get any longer than it is. If you like the video, hit the like button. If you have any questions, please comment and subscribe. It's a beautiful day today here in Orange County. I'm out with the family at Disneyland waiting for the heat to dissipate, and then we're going to head across the park. So I'm going to go try and enjoy the 4th of July with my family. I hope you do the same, and I will see you guys later. Thank you.